All right. Good evening, dear students. Thank you very much for having joined me tonight. Quite a pleasure to be with you again. Very much excited tonight because we have a new group accompanying us. And well, as I mentioned you yesterday, for those of you who are new, as I say, we're going to be discussing tonight a very interesting topic. And for those of you who are, well, accompanying me since some weeks ago, we're going to be moving towards a very interesting topic that is the reading section. Okay. So, well, let me to start this class, stream this this audio and also video to YouTube so that you can rewatch this whenever you want later on, right? As I told you, that we have that possibility of rewatching the classes when you miss one. So let me stream very quickly, and then we're going to start, okay? Because we have a lot of things ahead us, and we have, as I say, a lot of interesting material and topic to cover. So where am I? Okay, very good. A second here. Okay. Great. Okay, fantastic. So as I told you, this is going to be a very interesting topic, especially for those of you who are very much assiduous readers. I think and I trust that you're going to find this this section to be very much entertaining and well, something to be passionate with, because well, reading is a very interesting activity, right? And whenever you read in English, especially, I think that your mind is tremendously open to that. Is to say, that your mind comprehends this language way better. So you're not only going to improve for the exam this time, but you're also going to improve your skills, I think, when you practice for this particular section, okay? Well, so let me please share my screen with you, because I have prepared a presentation for you in order to introduce ourselves to this very, very much exciting and, as I say, challenging topic as well, okay? Because, well, it's reading. It has its difficulties. Well, let us start. So here we are. Let me also increase this. Great, here we are. So as I told you, we're going to discuss tonight the reading section, okay? And well, as I mentioned, this is going to be very much easy and entertaining for many of you, especially for those of you who are assiduous readers, as I say, people who like to read very much, and especially in English, right? Personally, when I was preparing myself for this exam, I found this part to be the most, let's say, entertaining one, because I always like to read a lot. So reading was just a pleasure for me. So as I say, but anyways, even if you don't find reading to be that much, let's say, pleasing, or if you don't like it very much, well, trust me that you're going to find this to be entertaining at least. And well, we're going to start with the material then. Okay, well, let us begin with some general aspects of the reading section. I think that this is very important. Those of you who are with me for a couple of weeks already know that every single time when we start a section, we discuss the general aspects first, because of, well, certainly it's important to have a very good outlook and perspective in basics, right? That's, well, basics always constitute a very important foundation for understanding everything, right? So let's start. The reading section is designed to assess how well you can read and understand the kind of material used in academic environment, okay? If you're applying your students to American universities, to European universities, or if you're planning to use this test, the TOEFL exam, as a means in order to obtain a position in an international company, let me tell you that this is one of those categories that, well, these institutions are very, very much, let's say, very much eager to know with regard to your performance, or they are very much concentrated and very much excited and disposed in order to understand how good you are performing in this particular section. Why? Because for academic and this labor purposes, as I mentioned, reading is fundamental, right? If you want to make some project with a company, if you need to communicate with your peers, it is going to be necessary for you to read the material they give you, the investigation you receive, or of course you study for an exam or to have any type of topic and material in a university, right? So that's the reason why, as I say, when institutions review this course, they're always very much, as I mentioned, they're always very much curious to know how good you are performing in this area, and they care about it, okay? So please, as I say, always motivate yourself with that, knowing that this is a very important part of the exam. And as I mentioned, it's necessary for you to polish your skills in this part, okay? Great. Now, what about the section itself? Because as I say, this is a section of the TOEFL exam, as we have discussed. It has 4 different sections, and this is one of them. And it's actually the first one you're going to be performing on, right? As I told you, when the exam begins, you always start with the reading section. It's the first thing you see, the first thing you receive, and the first thing you perform on is always the reading section, okay? So what about it? How is it organized? How is it administered? Let's discuss that. The reading section, your students, includes 3 or 4 reading passages that is each approximately 700 words long, okay? And these 3 or 4 reading passages, don't worry about the variation that there exists here. I'm going to explain why is it possible to receive 3 or 4. But the point is that these reading passages, independently on how many you get, they are always going to have 10 questions per passage, okay? That is always going to be the case. You're going to have a reading passage, and that reading passage is going to contain 10 questions that are going to ask you about the information that was included in that passage, okay? you will have overall, okay, for responding all the passages you receive, from 54 to 72 minutes. Now, again, as you can see here, there is a variation. And I want to explain you why is it possible that sometimes for some of you, when you take this exam, some of you are going to have 54 minutes and some of you are going to have 72. Let me explain why. The reason why there is this variation, not only in the time for performing on the section, but also in the quantity of material you receive, that is to say 3 or 4 reading passages, right? There is somebody who's getting into, so we'll have to repeat a little bit. All right, great. So as I told you, okay, for those of you who are just joining us, we are discussing right now the reading section, okay? And this reading section is going to ask you to read material that is academic and to respond some questions about it. Okay, this reading section, as I was mentioning you, dear students, contains 3 or 4 reading passages that each will have approximately 700 words long, okay? And these passages, as I say, independently and individually, are going to contain 10 questions per passage, okay? So in order to respond all these passages and all these questions, because as I say, each independent passage contains 10 questions about the material or the topic they're discussed, you're going to have overall for responding all the passages and the questions you receive, 54 or 72 minutes. Now, I was explaining why is it possible to have 3 or 4 reading passages, and I was about to explain as well why is it possible to have 54 minutes or 72 minutes in order to respond. Let me explain that, okay? The reason why this happens is that there is something for this particular section, your students, okay, for this section, the reading section, called the experimental reading section or the experimental version of the exam, okay? This experimental version of the exam is not something everybody receives. As its name indicates, it's experimental, okay? Not everybody receives it, just some people. And maybe you are wondering right now, what determines if I receive this experimental version of the reading section or not? Is completely random, okay? So for some people, when you take the exam, you are going to receive it. And by the way, they never tell you in advance. That is to say, you're going to discover by yourself when you are performing on the exam, if you receive the experimental version or if you didn't receive it. And you're going to know, of course, depending on whether you receive 3 or 4 reading passages. Why? Because when you, excuse me, let me explain this manner. Normally, dear students, normally, okay, listen to my words. Normally, the reading section, when you receive the normal section, let's say the normal version of the section, contains 3 reading passages. Each of these passages have 10 questions to respond. And overall, when you receive these 3 reading passages, you have 54 minutes to respond in all. I repeat, normally, in the normal version of the reading section, you have 3 passages, okay? Each of them with 10 questions. And you have 54 minutes in order to respond those 30 questions in total, right? Because 10 questions per passage, 30 questions, right? This is the normal version. Now, when you receive the experimental version of the reading section, that as I say, it's completely random, you don't decide to have it or not, you don't decide to have it or not, you are not told in advance if you're going to receive it or not. When you have the experimental version, that is not the normal one, but the experimental one, as I say, you're going to receive an extra passage. And therefore, you're not going to have 3 passages as before. No, you're going to have 4 passages to respond. And in that case, 40 questions to respond, right? Because the 10 questions per passage remain. So you have 4 passages, right? Overall, 40 questions because you are receiving 10 extra questions because you are also receiving the extra passage, right? And if you receive this experimental version with 4 reading passages to, well, to analyze and to respond about, then you're going to have 72 minutes in order to respond these 4 passages. If you receive, as I say, the experimental version of the exam, that is how it works, okay? That's the reason why there's this variation here. Some of you, if you receive the experimental version, are going to have 4 passages. The ones of you who receive the normal version of the reading part are going to have 3. And of course, as I say, the ones who have 3 passages, 54 minutes to respond in all, and the ones of you who have 4 passages, 72 minutes in order to respond them, okay? That is how it works, okay? I think it's very clear, right? And as I say, this is completely random. It's not as something that determines on this day you're going to receive the experimental version. So please go to this day or don't go on this day. No, doesn't work that way. As I say, it's completely random, okay? Now, maybe you're wondering, so if I receive it, could that affect me negatively or positively? Well, let me respond to you very honestly. No, it cannot affect you in any negative nor positive manner if you receive the experimental version. Why? For this very simple reason, that the only paragraphs, or excuse me, passages and questions that ETS evaluates, let us remember that that ETS is basically the company that organizes the exam, right? That is ETS. ETS always evaluates and considers for your score merely the normal 3 reading passages. That is to say, what you normally receive in the section. If you receive the experimental version, as I told you, you will receive an extra passage. You will have 4 instead of 3. But nonetheless, that 4th passage with its 10 questions is not going to be considered towards your score. That is to say, when the computer analyzes your responses and determines how much you got on the exam, those 10 questions at the end that belong to the 4th passage, are not going to be considered. That is to say, it doesn't matter if you responded those questions correctly, because those correct answers are not going to be considered when your score is determined. Nor, if you responded incorrectly to those questions, are those responses going to be considered, as I say, for your exam. So it doesn't matter if you respond to these questions correctly or incorrectly, they are never considered for your score. The only questions and passages that ETS is going to analyze and that will consider for your score, for evaluating you, are those questions and passages that normally come in the section. That is to say, the first 3 ones, all right? That is what you need to know, okay? Fantastic. Now, so maybe you're wondering, if it doesn't affect me, why do I receive it in the first place, right? Or in the first, in the first place. You receive it, okay, dear students, you could receive it. As I say, it's completely random and it's completely optional. It is not something that yes or yes will happen. To some of you could happen, to some of you could not happen. As I say, it's random. The reason why you receive this, some people receive this, is because by this experimental version, as its name indicates, I think, ETS's testing is evaluating new mechanisms for their exam. It's basically using you as a hamster, if you want to take that illustration. You are their hamster. Why? Because they are testing with you new types of questions, new mechanisms for responses, I don't know, new interfaces in your software. They're testing, I don't know, new options, new menus, new buttons. They can test a lot of things, okay, a lot of elements. But the point, as I say, is that they are testing new things. That's the reason why this is called experimental version. So if you receive it, as I say, it's as if you were being their hamster, no more than that. But at least they are not that cruel to say, well, they are our hamsters, but we're going to punctuate them because of that. No, they say, okay, you're going to be our hamster if you receive this, but we are not going to punish you, or we are not going to grade you in any manner if you receive it. Because as I mentioned and repeat, this experimental version, if you receive this 4th extra passage with 10 extra questions that are, as I say, novel, they are testing new things with those questions, are not going to be considered towards your score. Therefore, you shouldn't worry about it. If you receive this experimental version, dear students, well, receive it, perform it, as I say, respond the questions as if you were responding the other ones, but doesn't matter because it doesn't affect you, nor negatively, nor positively, okay? Very important. Fantastic. I'm gonna let you have some time in order to make questions later, so please give me a second, okay, until we come to that part. But third thing I wanted to say, okay, very important, don't worry if you're not familiar with the topic of a passage. Why I say this? I say this, dear students, because it's very important for you to understand and to identify that these reading passages you're going to receive, okay, they are not passages about, for example, things going on in a university, right? Or they are not passages about, I don't know, a diary, or they are not passages about the news, for example. No, these reading passages are academic passages. That is to say, the topic of these passages are always going to be related to scientific and academic subjects. They could be anything varying from medicine until technology, arts, chemistry, physics. I don't know, what else could it be? Computer science, architecture, well, a lot of academic subjects. Basically, think about any discipline or subject that could be taught in a university. If you can think about it, then it's a possible topic you may receive here in these passages, okay? So as I say, you're going to receive reading passages that are going to be academic, are going to be related to academic topics, and you're going to be reading those type of materials, okay? Now, don't worry if you're not familiar with the topic of a passage, because maybe you are saying, oh, but what happens, for example, if I receive a reading passage about biology, and it is about Darwin's evolutionary theory, for example. So if you say, oh, but I don't know anything about Darwin's evolutionary theory when you receive your passage, right? I'm not going to be able to respond to these questions. No, that is not the case. Why? Because, dear students, all the information you need to answer the questions will be included in the passage, okay? These questions you receive per passage, 10 questions per passage, right? You remember? Are not in order to test your own knowledge of the subject. They are not going to ask you things that are not contained in the passage, but all their responses in order to respond the questions can be found in the same passage you have read. You don't need to know any other external information about the subject. So it doesn't matter if you have never heard nor read about Darwin's evolutionary theory. If you receive a passage about it, you're going to be able to respond because, as I say, all the questions are going to be about the material there contained in your passage. So you can just read and respond, okay? And finally, there's going to be a glossary feature, okay, available to define words not commonly used if you need it, but merely endemic words. I want to clarify that. What happens if you don't understand a word? If that word is endemic, and what do I mean by endemic? Endemic is basically something that is belonging to a particular country, city, or region, right? I give you this illustration. Imagine that somebody in Europe, right, takes this exam. Because people in Europe, not everybody speaks English, right? People, for example, in Portugal, they speak Portuguese, right? Obviously, so they have to take the exam if they want to apply to universities in America or Great Britain, for example. So imagine that somebody from Portugal takes the exam. Awesome. If he receives, for example, a reading passage that contains the word shaman, I think that all of us in this class know what shaman is, right? Shaman is basically a magician that is very common in South America and Central America, right? If we receive that word in a reading passage, we are going to understand it because it's a word that is endemic from our region. But what happens to people in Europe, as I say, or in Africa? They have no idea what is a shaman, right? Because it's an endemic word. Those type of words, okay, that are endemic, that are not from your region, are going to be available for you to know their meaning in a glossary feature, okay? I'm gonna show you how that works, don't worry. But just those type of words, okay? Please don't misunderstand me. Doesn't mean that, for example, if you don't know what the word illustrious means, and that word illustrious is included in your passage, you can go to the glossary and say, what does the word illustrious mean? No, that doesn't work that manner, okay? Words that are not endemic, if you don't know them, you have to try to understand in following other techniques because you don't have a dictionary, okay? At any point during the exam, you are able or allowed to have a dictionary in your computer or a physical dictionary. So as I say, if you don't understand a word, you will have to find another manner to understand it. But as I say, this glossary merely works for endemic words, okay? Very good. Okay, so those are the general aspects of the reading section. So before you make your questions, okay, I want to show you how this section looks like on the actual exam because I think that is crucial, okay, for you to understand it. And then you're gonna have time to make your questions, of course, to have some commentaries, word of commentaries, etc. So let me okay, let me just do this very quickly so that I can show it. Okay. Very good. So please look at my screen right now. This is the simulator we have here at the company. And this is a very good image or imagery and representation of how the reading section is going to look like on the actual exam. When you perform in this part of the exam, you will have the reading passage on one side of your screen. As you can see, I have it here in this case, right? On the right side of my screen, right? As you can see, it's a very long passage. It's more than 700 words, okay? So it's a long passage. In this case, it's about Navajo code talkers, okay? Very good. As you can see, this could be something that, well, would be taught in a history class in a university, or I don't know. Well, I don't know any other subject in which this would be discussed, but the point is that it is an academic subject, okay? Well, on one side, you have that, the reading passage, okay? On the other side, you have something very important as well. That is the question for that passage. And as I told you, you will have 10 questions per passage. And you'll be able to see, as you can observe right now, one question per time. You're not able to see all questions at the same time. No, you just can see one question at a time, right? This is the first question, for example. And as you can see, well, this is the question, and below the question, you have some possible answers. This is very important. I want to remark this, very dear students. All questions in this section, okay, the questions you will receive in the reading section are multiple choice. That is to say, you just have to choose from a variety of possible answers, right? The one that you consider to be the correct one. You are never required to do it in the entire section, dear students, to write down your response. That is not the case, okay? So you always have to choose one of the multiple choice answers, okay? Sometimes, of course, the mechanism varies, and you will have to choose 2 or 3 correct answers. But that is always the case, as I say, choosing answers, but never writing answers or something like that, okay? So multiple choice, always, okay? Very good. Now, something else. As you can see, it says here question number 1, right? Very good. When you respond your question, dear students, you are the one who has to press the button next in order to see the other question. Because maybe some of you were thinking, okay, I respond and then the computer is gonna, I respond and then the computer is gonna show me the second question. No, that's not what it matters. The manner it works is that you have to, when you respond to your question, as you can see, you have 2 buttons here. It says next and it says previous. When you respond, you are the one who needs to press next. And when you press next, then this question is going to disappear. And as you can see, the second question is going to be there available for you to respond. This is exactly how it works on the exam as well, okay? So please pay attention. Here you have the question number 2. As you can see, question number 2 for this reading passage. As you can see, it's the same reading passage, Navajo code talkers, right? Well, let me tell you this following. When you have the question, dear students, you are actually not required to choose a correct answer in order to move to the following one. You can leave this question in blank, press next, and as you can see, you will have the third question, right? It says question number 3. So it's not necessary for you to always, yes or yes, choose a response in order to move on to the next question. You can leave them in blank if you want. Now, do I recommend you to do that? Certainly not. I don't recommend you to do so. Why? Well, let me tell you. First of all, it's always better, as I say, to choose one answer, even if you're not sure about it. Choose the one that you consider to be more plausible. And once you find that answer, press next. Why? First of all, because as I say, there is no like a penalty whenever you respond a question incorrectly. So even if you didn't respond the question incorrectly, or excuse me, even if you didn't respond the question correctly, it's fine because it's not going to be punishing you. Like ETS is not going to punish you for incorrect responses. It doesn't work that manner. So whenever you don't know, okay, or you are not sure of a response, anyways, go for one of them, okay? Because as I say, there's no penalty. If you get it wrong, there's no penalty, but you could also get it right? Like if you get lucky. And secondly, some people say, oh, I'm not sure about this one. I'm going to leave it in blank and I'm going to come back later. That is not very much realistic, trust me. I also did that when I was taking my exam the first time, and I never came back. Okay, so probably it's going to happen the same with you. You're not going to come back. Why? Because there are a lot of questions, and there's a lot of material. You're going to forget it. Trust me, and the time is not going to be sufficient. Okay, so please always choose one, the one you consider to be the well, the most plausible one, and then, well, if you have time, you can come back, of course, because as you can see, for example, you have the button that says previous. If you press previous instead of next, you're going to come back to the previous question. Right now we're in the question number 3, right? So if I press previous, I can go back to the question number 2, right? So you can do this exercise, going next and going back, next, back, next, back, as you want. And why? Because as I told you, dear students, normally you have 3 reading passages in this section, right? If you don't receive the experimental version. And you have, therefore, 54 minutes in order to resolve and to respond to the 3 passages you receive. And that time, okay, 54 minutes, you are the one who is able to administer as you want. You have 54 minutes in order to respond all the questions, all the reading passages. You can, for example, if you want, use, I don't know, 4 minutes in order to respond to 10 questions, and to use 25 minutes in order to respond each of the other passages. Time is not divided. You can use it at your own disposition, okay? And that's the reason why, as I say, you can go previous, back, previous, back, previous, back. Let me show you, for example. So if you go, let's say, we are right now in, okay, question number 2, question number 1. Okay, so let me show you this, dear students. This is question 1, right? Let me go back one more time. Okay, good. So this is another reading passage. For example, imagine that the first reading passage you received, dear student, is this one. That is, as you can see, about Cindy Sherman. Okay? As I told you, each passage contains 10 questions. And as you can see, this is question number 10 for this passage. That is not the one that we were reading before, right? This is Cindy Sherman's passage. So we are right now in the last question, question number 10, for this passage, that is Cindy Sherman's passage. What happens if I press next? If you responded to this already, what happens if I press this? As you can see, the new passage is going to be available for me. That is the one we were discussing, right? Navajo Code Talkers. So if you press previous, you can actually go back to the same passage. As I say, like it's like you can start from the very beginning, and you can skip all the questions until the last one if you want, and then you can come back. It's completely possible here, okay? As I say, you can administer your own time here. They are very much generous in that sense because they allow you to use the time in your own disposition, okay? You can respond to these questions rapidly, and then you can, for example, if a reading passage is more difficult, stay there for more time, but it is completely up to you. Okay, this is how the exam works. As I said, whenever you finalize a reading passage and you press next, you're going to receive the next one. And that's until you finalize with all your reading passages. Now, is there any question, dear students, about what we have discussed until this point, about the general aspects or this menu? Tell me, please. Jorge, Araceli, Roy, Mariana, Cecilia, Abigail, Fabiana, Adriana, Anaí, Miguel, any question about this?
No question.
Okay, thank you very much, Jorge.
No question, everything is clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Fantastic. For the rest of you guys, is it clear? Any question, doubts? Tell me.
It's clear, thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Miguel. All right. No questions then? Very good, no questions. So let me explain then now the following, okay? Now that we have seen this, let me move on and continue with the following. Let's talk about this, the chart's strategy to approach this section. Why and what do I mean by this? Dear students, because this is a very much old exam, people approach it differently every single time, right? So in order to approach this section specifically, there are a lot of strategies and techniques to do it. And let me show you and share with you the one that I consider to be the most convenient and efficient one. Okay, it is called the charts strategy. Let me tell you what I mean. Here I am. Well, what do I mean by this? In a second. Here I am. So, as you can see, when you receive your reading passage, in this case, this is the first question, right? For the passage that is titled Navajo Code Talkers. Well, great. When you receive your passage, what people normally do, okay, what test takers normally do when they receive this is that they receive it and they immediately read the entire passage. That is what they normally do, okay, most test takers. And well, it's intuitive, it's natural, right? They read the entire passage, and once they finalize, then they start responding to questions. That is to say, they don't respond to the questions if they have not finalized or ended with their reading of the passage. Okay, that is what people normally do. Now, I think that's wrong. Okay, I think that's wrong. It's not the best manner to do it. Why? Because when you are reading this entirely, what you're trying to do, I think, is to learn about this subject. You're trying to learn about Navajo Code Talkers because it's as if you were reluctant to respond to questions without knowing the topic. But I think that's wrong because let us remember, we are not in this exam because we want to learn about Navajo Code Talkers, right? We don't care about this topic. I don't care. Nobody cares about Navajo Code Talkers, right? So you are not here to learn all this. And I think the reason why people normally read this entirely is because they are used to the exams in South America and Central America that we study prior an exam, right? And we don't respond questions without having studied for the exam. But this is completely different, of course. We don't have to study anything. The only thing we have to do is to respond these questions without actually having to understand the topic. Because as I say, they are not going to ask our knowledge. These questions are always about what is here. So all their responses are here contained. Okay? So that's the reason why I think it is not necessary to read the entire passage because you don't want to learn about this. The only reason why you're reading this is in order to respond to questions, and that's it. Okay? So what does the charge strategy say instead? What is its proposition? Let me show you. Following this strategy, what you are going to do once receiving your passages is to go directly to the first question and use the passage to respond, not reading the whole passage first. Once you respond, you move on to the next question. Look at your question, respond using the passage, and repeat the process until your last question. This way, you are going to use your passage merely as a means to get over your question and not vice versa. Let me explain here. So instead of reading this entirely before responding to your questions, that is what people normally do, the charge strategy tells you and proposes you, hey, first thing you do, instead of reading this is read the question, understand the question, see the possible answers, and look for the response here, immediately here. Don't read it first entirely. Read the question, look at the answers, and read this in order to respond the question. Not entirely, but just the portion you need to read in order to respond this. And maybe you're wondering, how do I know in what part of my reading passage is my response? Because as I am telling you, all the responses are here. But how do you know where is your response for this first question? Don't worry, the charge strategy is prepared to respond. To follow this strategy is possible, dear students, because all questions are released following the chronological order of the passage. Namely, the first question or the first two are going to be about the first paragraph of the passage. The third question about the second paragraph. The fourth question about the third paragraph, and so on. Therefore, you are going to be able to respond orderly without having read the entire passage beforehand. You're wondering, where can I find my response for the first question? Well, simple response. In the first paragraph, because as you can see, dear students, the reading passage is divided into some paragraphs, right? For example, from here until here, right? From here until here is the first paragraph. And then there is a space of separation between the first paragraph and the second paragraph, as you can see here. From here until this point, we have the second paragraph. And once again, we have a separation from the first paragraph until the second paragraph, right? That's how you identify them. You identify the paragraphs by looking at the beginning, the end, and seeing the separation that exists between this paragraph and the new one you're going to find out, okay? Well, the first question is always going to ask you, trust me, always, about the first paragraph. How can you be sure of what I say is true? What was important in the development of a new communication method according to paragraph 1? Usually the same questions direct you to the paragraphs, trust me, usually. But as you can see, the first question is asking you about the paragraph number 1, right? Paragraph number 1. So the only thing you need to read in order to respond this particular question, dear students, is the first paragraph. You don't need to read anything else. You don't need to read the entire passage. No, just the first one, the first paragraph. Now, let's see what the second question is all about. Next, what it says. The word impenetrable in paragraph 2 is closest in meaning to, what does it say? In paragraph 2, right? Question number 2, paragraph number 2, right? Look at it. Paragraph 2, question number 2. Where should you look for your response? Well, not in paragraph 1, certainly, but in paragraph 2. Your response is going to be here. Again, you are avoiding and you are saving yourself from the huge process and trouble and burden, I would say, of having to read the entire passage just to respond this, because it's in the second paragraph. Now, sometimes, next, for example, the third question will still be in the second paragraph. Notice, question 3, where is the response? It can be inferred from paragraph 2 that Philip Johnston, and of course, in this case, you wouldn't have to look your response for question number 3 in paragraph 3, but you have to look for it in a paragraph number 2. Why? Because the same question, as I say, is telling you that, okay? This is always the case. Sometimes, for example, the first and the second responses, or questions are about the first paragraph. And the third question is about the second paragraph. But the point is that the order is always respected. Questions don't skip the paragraphs. What is not possible is that, for example, you're going to receive, let's say, question number 1 about paragraph 5, or question number 5 about paragraph 1. That is impossible. But the chronological order is always respected. Question 3, as you can see, about paragraph 2. And now let us see what question 4 asks for. Question 4, the phrase wary of in where? Paragraph 3. As you can see, the last question was about paragraph 2, the third one, right? And now the fourth question is about what? Paragraph number 3. So as you can see, the chronological order is always respected. It always goes in a straight line, following order. So that helps you, right? Because the only thing you have to read in order to respond to this question is paragraph number 3. That would be, in this case, this one. You know why this is super important and super useful, dear students? It is super useful and important because sometimes your questions are going to omit passages, or excuse me, paragraphs. What do I mean by that? Now, for example, paragraph number 6, that is this one, could never be a material for a question. That is to say, sometimes you will find that your 10 questions are all of them about paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and 4, but they never ask you anything about paragraph 5. Or the contrary, they could be about paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and 5, but they never ask you anything about paragraph number 4. So by using and following this strategy, you are also saving yourself from that burden of having to read material that is completely useless. And again, you are not reading this in order to become an expert on this topic, right? You don't care about it if you don't read it entirely. What you care about is having the correct responses for these questions, and that's it. All right? So this is the charge strategy. In my opinion, tremendously efficient, productive, advantageous. Nonetheless, if you are more comfortable with reading this entirely before responding, completely up to you, of course, you are free, okay? But as I say, this is a strategy that I always use, and I think it's tremendously proficient. Any question, dear students, about the strategy we have just discussed here? Concerns, hesitations, doubts, how it works? Tell me, please. Jorge, Miguel, Araceli, Roy, Mariana, Cecilia, Abigail, Fabiana, Adriana, Anaí, questions? Okay.
It's all clear.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. What about the rest of you guys? Questions? No?
No questions.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Roy. There you are. Well, let us move on then. So that is the strategy I recommend you to use. Nonetheless, as I say, you are totally free in order to pursue and to follow any other technique you may find more attractive or natural. Well, next thing, and the last thing we're going to discuss tonight, types of questions you will find in this section. As I have told you, this exam, what I love about it is that it's super repetitive. Given that it's repetitive, you can find patterns in the exam. And now, in the reading section, those patterns are especially located and to be found in the questions. What do I mean by this? Listen to my words. What ETS asks you is always different. Why? Because, for example, when I took the exam, I remember that my reading passage was about whales. One of my reading passages was about whales. And I have it on mind because it was super difficult, I remember. It was about whales. If my reading passage was about whales, you are never going to receive the same passage I received. Maybe you receive another passage about whales, but it's going to be a totally different material. You are never going to receive my passage because ETS continually creates more and more and more material. And they never share it. Quite ironic. They never share it. Yeah, they never share it. They never, let's say, dispose of that material free for people to practice. Well, I guess it's for commercial purposes anyways. The point is that what they ask you is always different, right? Because it's a new passage every single time. But now listen, how they ask their questions is always the same. I repeat, what they ask in their questions is always different because the material is always different. But how they ask their questions about the material, it's always the same. How they do it. And given that is the case, that they actually repeat their wording, their system for questioning and asking information, we are able to identify some types of questions in this exam. And because of that, if you know how to identify this type of questions, then you will also know how to respond them every single time. Why? Because if the way they ask is always similar, then the way to respond those questions must be by definition similar, right? So we're going to learn tonight the first type of question to be found in this section. And in the rest of classes, we are going to dedicate our time to study and to understand the rest of questions. So please don't miss any class because this is super important. This reading part is more theoretical, I would say, because understanding this is the secret, trust me, for responding each question consistently with correct responses, okay? Great. So let us start with the first type of question that is called vocabulary question. That's super easy, okay? The vocabulary question, dear students, are designed to test your knowledge of words and phrases that are commonly used in academic or non-academic contexts. Each vocabulary item consists of a sentence with one word or phrase highlighted. Let me show you an example, but this is basically a type of question that will ask you about the meaning of a word or phrase, as simple as that, okay? This is one type of question you could receive. Let me show you an example. The example could be this one. What does the word distant mean in this context? And here you have the context they are referring to, this sentence. It's difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. As you can see, the word distant here is highlighted with red. And I did this on purpose because in the exam, these words are always highlighted as well. Whenever you find this type of question and this type of wording, that's how can you recognize it, right? What does the word mean in this context? That's how you recognize them. They are always going to highlight the word, okay? In the passage, they will highlight it. That's the reason why I also highlighted it here. So the sentence is that one. That is the context. It's difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. So what does the word distant mean in this context? And here we have multiple choices, as I told you. We have impossible, far away, observable, fearful. Which one of these possible answers is the correct one? Well, before we respond, let me give you some recommendations. Even if you think, dear students, you know what the word could mean, remind that context is the transcendental source that gives each word its meaning. I repeat, context is the transcendental source that gives each word its meaning. Why do I say this? Because when I was first taking the exam and preparing myself for it, what I did when I had this type of questions proposed in the exam was that I read the word, and if I knew it, I chose the answer or the option that came to my mind more rapidly. For example, what does the word, I don't know, whatever, like great means? Well, amazing, right? And I saw the option amazing, and great means amazing. Well, amazing. And I move on directly to the other question without reading the context in which that word was placed. And that is super important because, as I say, these words that they are going to ask you for are always placed in a context. That context, for example, in this case is the sentence, right? That surrounds the word, or it could be the previous sentence or the next sentence after the word that is highlighted. But as I say, you have a context, and that word is placed in a context. And in order to respond these questions correctly, dear students, you need to understand what that word means in the context in which it is located. Because if you respond the question with your own dictionary knowledge, it's not going to be correct, okay? Why? Because dictionaries are not what gives each word its meaning. Dictionaries are not transcendental sources of information and knowledge and meaning, no. Is the context of each word what gives its word or what gives its meaning, okay? Context, everything is context. So as I say, read the word in its context to know its true meaning. This is how you can respond correctly to this type of question, dear students. Read the word that is highlighted in its context and let the context guide you in this case in your decision process. It's not your knowledge of the dictionary. The context, read the word in its context. For example, for this word, what is the context? It says, it's difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. This is as if it were telling you, when you were a child, for example, when you were young, didn't your uncle, for example, came to you someday and tells you, for example, hey, have you ever thought about getting married in the future? And you respond to him, right? Oh, come on, uncle. I'm very young. I just want to go out to some parties and to hang out with my friends, to get a girlfriend, to get a boyfriend. That is what I wanted to do. I'm young. Come on. Being an adult is very distant for me, right? That is something you could have said. And that is the context, if you notice here, of this word, distant. Come on, uncle. Being an adult is very distant for me. So obviously, in that context, that is this one, right? The word means far away. Because when you are a young person, when you are young, you say, come on, being adults. That is far away, 10, 20 years until I become an adult. I want to enjoy my life first. Then I'm going to think about responsibilities and getting married, right? So that context, the word distant means far away. But now let us think about the fact that the same word here, students, distant, could mean a completely different thing in other context. Because what if I tell you, being the president of my nation is very distant for me? I repeat, being the president of my nation is very distant for me. What does the word distant mean in that context? It doesn't mean far away, because I am not meant to be the president of Bolivia. I mean, I could be someday, who knows, the president, but the point is that I am not destined to be the president of Bolivia, right? So I cannot say it's far away from me, as if that would happen yes or yes in the future. No, I cannot say that. But if I tell you, being the president of Bolivia is very distant for me, what I mean is that it's impossible, right? Or that it's almost impossible, that it's super difficult to be the president of a nation. Of course, if I say, come on, man, being the president of my nation is very distant. What I mean in that context, excuse me, is that being the president is almost impossible or impossible. Can you notice? So as I say, is the context what gives each word its meaning. Oh, no, excuse me, that's true. It's context, excuse me, what gives each word its meaning. It was correct. Context gives each word its meaning. So always, please, read the context, read the word in its context in order to understand its true meaning. That is how you respond to this type of question. Any concern, any doubt here, dear students? Tell me. Questions about this type of question? Roy, Jorge, Miguel, Araceli, Mariana, Cecilia, Abigail, Fabiana, Adriana, Anay, questions?
No, it's clear.
All right, fantastic.
It's
Thank you very
clear.
much. Thank you. You guys. What about you guys? What about the rest of you? Are we fine?
And some questions, the words are similar, but this is the example.
Mm-hmm. Like, you mean fearful? This one, fearful?
No, teacher, and this example is easy, but some
Oh.
questions there are more similar words.
Oh, yes. Yes, you're right. That's totally true. And that scenario or case, as I say, what you have to do as well, once again, read the context, and trust me, the context is going to guide you. Is the context what is always going to represent that transcendental source that directs you to a correct response, okay? The criteria is the same. As you say, sometimes the questions are going to be easier, sometimes more difficult, but the criteria to respond is always the same, trust me. Reading it in its context, thinking about what the context suggests, and responding in that manner, okay? Very good, but you're completely right, dear Mariana. All right, very good. Well, we're going to stop tonight's class here, okay, dear students. It was fantastic to discuss with you and to learn all these things. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the types of questions, okay? We're not going to have a practical class, but we're going to continue with the theory. And please don't miss it, because it's tremendously important for you to be there and to learn how to identify and respond to these questions, okay? Before we go, I'm going to take your assistance, okay? So please accompany me a little bit. And please help me with your kind responses for the traditional poll that we always fill, okay? Help me with that. And now let me please take your assistance. If you have any question, any commentary, please feel free to express it. So I take your assistance. Okay, here we are. So it's here present, where am I? Graciela, Abigail.
Present, teacher.
Okay, thank you very much. What about Brian David?
Present.
Thank you very much. Brian. What about Araceli Patiño?
Present.
Thank you very much, Araceli. What about Oscar Samuel? All right. Baca Mariana.
Here.
Thank you very much, Mariana. And Maria Cecilia.
Present.
Thank you very much. What about this other group? We have Camila Ramirez. Right. Mayra Alejandra. Salguero Fabiana.
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Fabiana. What about Quiroga Adriana? I saw her, no, I see her. Zúñiga Sergio. Okay. Alondra Lisette. Jose Miguel.
Here.
Thank you very much, dear Jose Miguel. There you are. What about Anaí Estefania?
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you very much, Anaí. Fantastic. And finally, our dear Jorge Alberto.
Here.
Thank you very much, Jorge. There you are. Well, great. Thank you very much, dear students, for your kind responses. And well, as I told you, a pleasure to be with you tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to continue because, as I say, we have a lot of things to learn. Please don't miss tomorrow's class, okay? Have a wonderful night, and I see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
See
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you very much. See you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. See ya. See you. Bye.